I thought this was a really interesting and great presentation. I actually thought you did a wonderful job presenting some fairly technical material in an accessible and very informative way. All this to say, thank you because I've learned a lot from reading your paper and from your presentation today. I also think that in general um, your thoughts about the limitations of optogenetic techniques are spot on. And unfortunately, I don't have much to say about that because, except for giving you a thumbs up and a nod, I think you're really right here. So my comments really focus on the philosophical implications of your view, and specifically, I would like to know more about two very broad philosophical concepts that I think are somewhat central to your conclusion, and these are pluralism on the one hand and reductionism. So let me just say a couple of things about each, and basically then I would love to hear more about what you have to say. Beginning with pluralism, it seems to me that philosophical discussions of pluralism, not just in philosophy of science or even the philosophy of neuroscience, but across the board, are somewhat ambiguous. Because on the one hand, pluralism refers to and I think this is the way you've been using the term, pluralism in this first sense reflects the importance of adopting multiple perspectives. So analyzing complex systems not just from one ground level, but from different angles. But there's also a second sense of pluralism, which was more dominant, I think, in the 80s and maybe early 90s. And this is in a sense, of, it's a form of theory dependence, where it's not just important to adopt different perspectives, but these different perspectives may be incompatible, and there's no fact of the matter as to which one we should adopt or privilege. I'm thinking here of the approaches, for example, of John Dupre and Philip Kitcher back in the days. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, as far as I can tell, the first kind of pluralism, which, if I get your point right, broadly corresponds to your methodological pluralism, is not that controversial, at least de dicto, among philosophers of science. So I think, and to the best of my knowledge, most scientists would also welcome the idea of, well, just if there's another fruitful perspective, if someone else can bring something to the table, then be it. Then, of course, there are internal wars and turf battles and so forth. But no one really opposes to it. But the second kind of pluralism is way more controversial. And to the best of my knowledge, or on my understanding, when people like John Bickel sometimes um, criticize pluralism, it's this second kind of theory laden sort of a perspectivalism that they have in mind. And so I would love to know more if you agree that there's a distinction there where you stand on the spectrum. And moving on to reductionism, um, again, I'm gonna throw out a few thoughts, which are part of a much broader project. So I could talk about this for hours, but hey, I only have a few minutes. Um, it seems to me that we're at a point in philosophy of science in general where the how to put it the the debate between reductionists and anti-reductionists is no longer clear, and the culprit, in my opinion, is the notion of reduction itself. So let me say more of what I mean. I think that's no, it's hard to put words in other people's mouths, but I think that even hardcore reductionists, John Bickel and some of his followers, could pretty much accept much of what you said, with the proviso that perhaps if you intend the stronger notion of pluralism, they might disagree there. But the truth is, what they would say is what you're talking about multiple perspectives. All these multiple perspectives are part of the broader reductionist endeavor. And people who oppose that view say, no, 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 that's a mistake. It's not all reductionism. All these other techniques are higher level that play a prominent role. And reductionists say, no, 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 it's part of the reductive strategy. So I would love to know more about exactly what you mean by reductionism, and basically, I would love to know what's, in your opinion, what's at stake here. Is there a substantial debate? Where do you see your views impacting this debate and so forth? And then I have one last, and this is more of a comment than anything. I didn't catch it in the paper, but I was very interested towards the end of your presentation. You talked about the role of theory in science in general, and I just wanted to say I think you're absolutely correct about this. In my opinion, in the philosophy of science, there's been a tendency over the last maybe 15, 20 years to downplay the role of theory, and I think that's a crass mistake. But again, this is a talk in and of itself. I just wanted to say that I thought that was interesting, and that was, I think, an important point to make. But again, thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful.
Oh, no, thank you so much. And I want to apologize, too, because I didn't get to read your pluralism paper before this talk, and I'm going to do it after, and I hope we can have conversations about this past this point. And thanks so much. Those were great questions, and I just want to make sure that I get them. Is this right? People can still see me, right? And everything. I mean, I'm guessing.
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. But okay. Now I don't see Marco anymore. But anyway, I guess it doesn't matter. I'll just imagine that Marco's on the other end of the camera.
Jackie, if you want to see all the participants, just click again on the change view mode, which is in the right top of your window, and click the first option, so you can see all participants. Because maybe you are sharing your slides. Yeah,
Oh,
maybe you can.
Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, there. Thank you. So, all right. Yeah, you don't need to see the mouse with the thank you on it. All right. So to kind of, I'll try to sort of reconstruct these questions. So I take it that in the first case with respect to pluralism, I mean, and we can talk about methodological and theoretical pluralism. And I think, I don't think Bickel has any problem with methodological pluralism. And I don't think anybody really has a problem with that. But I have found when I've talked to John about the need for task analyses when we're looking at these behavioral experiments and trying to figure out what the organisms are actually doing, he doesn't seem to think that behavioral, to have some training in behavioral neuroscience is necessary to tease apart what is actually happening in these experiments. And so in that respect, that's the idea of where I think that he doesn't think the theory should have to come in, that you can somehow, he'll talk about these tasks that are imported as being, they're well validated in the areas in which they've originated, and then they're imported, and so we know what it is that they measure, so there's no further question, and we can just go about our business. But I wonder how many techniques that's actually true about. So that's the first issue of methodological pluralism. Now, as you said, this notion of theory-ladenness and or theoretical pluralism. I mean, in neuroscience, we really don't talk about there being bona fide theories. I mean, that's still what we're searching for, and there are some that are coming along, right? Like maybe the predictive processing model. There are different ways to theorize what's going on, but there aren't, we usually talk in cognitive neurobiology as there being no bona fide theories. Like maybe it is the case that there are these just general kind of home truths and we're intervening. But I think it's important to remember that these techniques that we're importing have come from specific areas of science that in which there are theoretical frameworks. And so, and again, then I mean, everything for me, I kind of focus particularly on the experiments, but then to not take seriously those different perspectives when we're trying to figure out what's going on is going to potentially lead us to error, or the techniques will be potentially in error. And then the way to get clear on what kinds of errors there are requires these different perspectives. So that's I don't know if that addresses your first question in as much detail as it might, but that's a first pass at answering it. And then with respect to the reductionism question, I agree with you. I mean, I think traditional ways of thinking about reduction in philosophy of science, I mean, that wasn't my target here. It was this idea that Bickel had referred to the strategy that's operative in this area of science as reductive in practice, meaning that you can just intervene molecularly, intervene over here, tweak something here, and then look at the behavior over here and establish a causal connection. And so it's that kind of reduction that is the target of what I'm looking at. So I do think that John still thinks that that kind of reduction is okay. I guess a question I would have for him is, and I haven't asked this question directly, if an investigator thinks that a technique might be subject to specific kinds of errors, where should they go to look for answers? And I think that if he says that they're not to go anywhere but the cells and molecules, they're supposed to figure everything out with respect to that limited domain, right? And there's a lot in between there, right? That we're, in between the tweaking and the behavior. That's a problem, and I think that's a reduced view that I think if he's amenable to that, I think it's problematic. So did that answer did I get everything or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my questions were very broad, but I think I have a much better sense of where you're going with this and what your critique is. I mean, I have my own thoughts, of course, about the reduction in the debate and the pluralism debate, but I think all your points are well taken and they're important to make. So thanks.
Yeah, no, and I think for my purposes, I need to, I mean, I put this on the shelf. I'm talking about it today, but I need to kind of, get immersed in that literature and sort some things out. So I really value the questions that you asked me, and I hope there'll be another occasion to talk again. And I guess maybe there might be another round of questions, but also after that.
Well. So very good for this first exchange. Now let's move to the second one. Well, Sarah, if you can turn your camera to active. Okay, great.
Hello. All right. Hi, Jackie. Can you hear me? Great. So agreed with Marco on this. It's a fantastic talk and a fantastic paper. And as further background to the background you gave, I think for everyone who's listening, it was really Jackie's original, her earlier work on the Morris water maze and raising some deep skeptical questions about the molecular studies of memory was really formative for my own thinking about what we can infer from this science. So there were ways in which that actually led to my initial extreme enthusiasm about the optogenetics, because I thought it was solving some problems that those experiments really couldn't. So I'm grateful for that personally. And I think you're certainly right that, especially initially, I was and am very excited about what optogenetics can do in the more limited context of memory research in particular. But over time, I've gotten increasingly skeptical about exactly how far that can go. And so I feel like I've really, it feels to me descriptively like I'm internalizing. I've got my own internal Jackie Sullivan telling me what things I need to be worried about when I'm thinking about those experiments. But please. It's a good thing. I see it as that. But yeah, I'm grateful for this, and I overall I think I absolutely agree with you. So most of my questions have to do with, well, I have one general question, then a couple more specific ones about how to relate to the stuff that I find most interesting in the optogenetic stuff. So maybe I'll ask the first one and let you answer, and then ask the others. But the first one I was thinking about has to do with your sort of claims about and commitments to pluralism with regards to these techniques and interventions, and how that relates to the broader claims about revolution. And I think it's distinct from Marco's question, but in the same kind of general ballpark. And that's to think, so, John, Bickel, and Carl and others are excited by this idea that the revolutions are really about tool development, that's really what's spurring innovation and new ideas and new work. And something in that seems deeply right to me, or at least that that's part of the story. And I started wondering, based on a quote that was in the paper actually, and something that came out in what you said, whether if we really want to be pluralist, whether we can hold that view about tool development and revolution, because no tool, each tool is one perspective or one approach, and so there seems to be a conflict between thinking about tool-based revolution and pluralistic approaches. And I just wonder what you would sort of say about that relationship.
Yeah. So, I mean, so there are a couple things. Like one is that, these tools are coming from specific areas of science that have a specific perspective. And as you say, that each tool gives a specific perspective on a system. And I would want to, I want to be optimistic about the fact that I do think that tool development is fundamental for revolutions. And I guess maybe, I don't know if the quote that you're mentioning goes back to Bizaki, who says, there's initial enthusiasm for a technique, and then you've got to do this hard work after the techniques come about. And I don't know if this answers your question, but I think, I don't see why it wouldn't be the case. You might worry that if there is so much pluralism that it stultifies tool development, and then we don't have tools kind of coming out as fast as they do. And so then that's a problem. And so ideally it'd be, if pluralism is antithetical to new tool development, if that can be shown, I guess, then I guess anytime I would say, doesn't there need to be some sort of balance between these kinds of things, right? So I don't know, but I don't know if that answers kind of your deeper question about. So I'm looking at my note here, because I hit my head and my memory's a bit foggy, but yeah, I just feel, I don't know if Carl wouldn't be sympathetic to the kind of pluralism that I'm talking about. I feel like John doesn't, I don't know, maybe I should ask you to ask the question again, because I
meant it as a sort of general question, but it hadn't occurred to me, as someone who both thinks that this methodological pluralism is a way we want the science to proceed, and that part of what spawns revolutions is the nature of tool development. Your paper, reading it again, prompted me to think about the ways in which those two claims might be in conflict. So if it's really a tool that's doing it, but a tool is only one method from one perspective, then there are limits to how revolutionary that, or how helpful revolution is, or something like that. So It was just
Okay, thanks. So a tool offers a perspective on a system, but then how good is the perspective that it offers? These experiments, because of the causal complexity of this particular kind of system that we're looking at, it seems like you need more than just the tool. You need the revolutionary tool, but you also need to understand the system. And then the question is, well, is pluralism necessary for understanding the system? We can't just, so the tools are going to be fundamental. And I'm not saying that we're not making progress in the face of these revolutions happening. I'm basically saying, when we have these new tools come about, and we start saying these kind of outrageous things about what we can do with them, maybe we should take a moment of pause and realize that, the tools are really great, but we have conceptual and theoretical work that we also have to do, right? And so I don't think, and so I don't know if that's, the tool in itself, I guess one question is, what kind of perspective does a tool itself offer? Because you're taking that tool and you're putting it and using it to provide a perspective on a system, and you're arriving at certain conclusions on that basis, right? And it tells you something. But the question is, does it tell you something without some theoretical structure there, or doesn't it? And so, and then is pluralism necessary to get a handle on that? And I think just because the technique could be, given how you're using it, could be result in errors based on what you're trying to do with it. if you don't consider probing it from different vantage points, then that will mean that tool, how far will that tool get you, I guess, is the question. And so, so I guess then, I mean, so in some ways, I mean, I don't know if anybody would say that's optimistic about this, oh, we just need the tool. I don't know. You know, I think when maybe John makes those pronouncements, there's something more, you know, there. But I mean, I do think he's looking at hacking and saying, hey, you know, if you can spray it, then it's real. If you can intervene, then, you know, you just need some, you know, and the other thing is that a lot of people who run these experiments don't have the theoretical background, right? That they would need to understand how the technique itself works. I mean, this is true. This is what hacking says about, you know, and the Hadron Collider, like with respect to those kinds of experiments, the people who are actually doing the intervening know that they're intervening in something, but they don't need a theoretical structure to be able to say, oh, I'm intervening in this. But look, I mean, then I think you run into all these kinds of problems where, you know, you don't have a theoretical structure. So how do you kind of interpret what it is that you're seeing? And then how do you correct when things go wrong? I mean, this is sort of just the, maybe, you know, chipping away. It's a big question. So that's a great question. And so I don't know, is that answer, I don't know if that answer is satisfactory.
Yeah. I think that's really, I like that. Thanks. The other sort of more specific question that I had was, so I really like the old HT studies. I didn't know about them before you're directing attention to them, and they're really, really nice. And I think it made me think that, I'm not sure if this is a perfect distinction, but we can think about two different ways that we can use optogenetics when we're exploring molecular systems. So one thing we can do is we can take, well, there's already causal relationships we cared about or that we had hypotheses about the relations between particular circuits or regions and particular behaviors. And so we had certain methods, and now we can just replace those methods with opto ones. And so, which is in some sense what they're doing, and then comparing, you know, maybe we are comparing methods as much as we are giving new approaches to the results. And I think that that's right and interesting. But I think for the studies that I got excited about, because they were memory studies, what was happening was particularly because of optogenetics, we could do things we couldn't do with these other, you know, being able to like follow the particular neurons that activate during a particular active learning and then reactivating those. That requires a level of spatial and temporal resolution that no lesions or drugs or any other intervention was going to give us. And so that is part of what made me so excited about the technique. And in reading your paper, I realized like that's pluralism there is tricky, or at least now. So now what we have is, okay, a brand optogenetics lets us do something we don't have any other way of doing. And then I went like, I guess it's somewhat just a comment, but also then I'm wondering, the more question here is, you know, what, if we want to advocate for or support methodological pluralism, sort of where do we go from here? So is there some sort of obligation to try to find new tools or techniques to vary this, or what? What should we do about that?
Yeah, so a couple things I want to say in response to this. So one of the reasons, I mean, so just to say that this criticism that in this paper was, it leaves, you know, it's a separate kind of thing, like in the history of neuroscience, right? You have Lashley trying to remove the engram, but then you have individuals who are trying to cut out an area and see what the impact is on behavior. So I do take these and the experiments that you were looking at that look at optogenetic techniques for the purposes of manipulating memories as different. And so just to say that this in particular, I mean, this criticism applies to these attempts to link causally changes over here to changes over there. Now, with respect to the kinds of experiments that you do look at, I mean, I don't know if you find any value there in taking up, I mean, I think my recollection is that you do take value in taking a pluralistic perspective with respect to those experiments. That you're not, and I apologize because I hadn't read your paper very recently, and but I mean, so I think
the technique lets us do something new, like, so it's not it lets us do something no technique did before. Then, I'm just wondering where, like, how we implement the lessons about pluralism that I think we should take seriously, like how we implement them in those cases. So we sort of like whether that means we should be extra careful about the kinds of inferences we're making because we don't have other intervention methods by which to question the results that we're getting.
Yeah. No, and I think I agree with that. And actually, I wanted to say that those experiments too have been looking. I mean, I think these worries about looking downstream of where they're doing the targeted activations to, create new memories or disrupt memory. There's this paper by Frank. I'm sure you saw the paper by Franklin and Jocelyn that came out about, you don't even need experience to have these memories, right?
Yeah.
And so, but they're looking downstream of where they're making the manipulation, which kind of goes along with this worry that, you want to see what's happening downstream because, is this kind of thing that you're forming similar to memories that, and that whole process, like, and the other thing is, I guess, and this is a question, I can ask you later time, but I mean, I think to some extent, you have to have different heuristics that you're using to interpret what it is that's going on, which means that you do look towards other areas of science to try to, tease out what's happening in those experiments. So I think pluralism, as you do, is really important there. And so did I answer? Sorry. You did. No, and I think the stuff that you're doing is really interesting, and I think that it's so important to have the philosophical work looking at this, because I don't think that the scientists necessarily have the conceptual resources to maybe understand what it is that they're doing. I mean, not to say, I mean, it's good work, but but they need their
that's right. That's what I think.
On that, we all agree, I think, and we just have to convince the scientists, which is the hard part, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
And so, just a reminder, we are about to accept some questions from the attendees. Actually, one attendee has sent us a question for Jackie. She was Carrie Fig, though, but she has left, unfortunately. But we have the question, and we will speak it out after the last discussions. Q&A micro session. So Jesse.
Okay, in the meantime, we just remind us in order to make questions for the attendees.
And can I say one thing? And Sarah, I hope we can talk about this stuff more.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Sorry. I want to.
Yeah. We will. I promise.
Hi, is it? Yep. My mic working?
I hear.
Yep.
Now I see you. Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
So sort of seconding the things that everybody else has said, thirding, I thought this was a very pleasantly sober take on optogenetics, and I really, really hope that it inspires less revolutionary hype from philosophers and more critical optimism about techniques and innovations. The scientists are good enough at hyping themselves, and I think a very important role that we can play is being critically optimistic. And I mean, I'll say it because I don't care what people think. I don't think Bickel's attitude and approach of saying, this is revolutionary, it's amazing, is actually helping science or public perception of science. And so I very much have always appreciated your work, and hopefully more people follow suit. More little Jackies in philosopher of neurosciences heads like Sarah has. So I'd like to get you to elaborate a little more on something a little different than the reductionism stuff, but still related to pluralism. In particular, because I've imagined a response that someone like Bickel might have to your argument that takes the very conceptual tool that you bring against you, which is severity. So it strikes me that severity is misaligned with pluralism, or like a deeply rooted pluralism of the kind that you're advocating for. Because at least in my recollection of it, the notion of severity that that Mayo is working with, which is inherited from Popper, has strong ties to sort of Baconian notions of crucial experiments. The sort of idea that if I could just design one really, really, really good experiment, I can, confidently accept a hypothesis on the basis of that experiment. It's just very hard to do, but that's the ideal that we should be aiming for. One crucial test. And I see pluralism as something vaccine against the idea that there even could be a crucial experiment or crucial test. And in part because just thinking about the case that you put forward, it's not just that the experiment you described deepened the scientists' understanding of what optogenetics was doing, but it also compelled a rethinking of what lesion experiments are actually getting at and what the drug interventions are actually getting at, right? That there's a difference between these long-term changes and these short spike and these short quick changes, but also even the idea that drug-based interventions are inhibitory because you're getting the same kinds of effects from excitatory interventions on the optogenetic side. And so these new techniques come on the table, and in an effort to understand their error characteristics, we come to a different understanding of the techniques that were already there before. So in essence, even past experiments come under question when new things come into play. So given all of that reflection and thinking and some concerns about severity, here's the way in which I see severity being used against the pluralist stance. Which is that this is just a transient problem with optogenetics. The issue, as you point out, is correctly that we don't understand its error characteristics. And once we've bootstrapped our way up using all these other techniques to understanding exactly what optogenetics is doing, then we can get rid of everything else, and optogenetics will be our perfect intervention tool. Because then it will be able to severely test our local hypotheses about neurons and their relationship with behavior.
Okay, good. All right. No, okay. I like that question. Thank you for that question. So I guess, I mean, I'm not committed to the idea that, yeah. So let me just say this. So the way, I guess the way that I'm not committed to some of the things that Mayo has to say. I mean, really what I don't have in mind here a crucial experiment. I mean, these techniques, they're the error characteristics that, I mean, we can't necessarily understand their error characteristics maybe in the absence of where we go to deploy them. And then anytime we run an experiment in which we deploy them, there will be other features of that experiment and that experimental context that will potentially need to be considered from different perspectives in order to determine what the errors are there. So I think one of the problems with my trying to explain what my position is that I focus a lot on the optogenetic techniques, but I wanted to make clear that it's the optogenetic techniques combined with behavioral experiments where you don't necessarily know, what's going on. And there are going to be lots of different experiments looking at lots of different kinds of behaviors that organisms exhibit. And for any kind of empirical question that an investigator is interested in testing, they're going to want to engage in this kind of error probing. And so I don't know, I mean, in that respect, there's so much work being done that I don't have the idea that there's this crucial experiment kind of anywhere. I feel like we're kind of, we move from one experimental context to another, and there's certain conditions that have to be met so that we are arriving at something that's cumulative. But I'm not going to say that there's only one right recipe. I just think that pluralism has to be an important part of it, especially given the origin of the techniques that we're using and the kind of thought that went into developing them, and the fact that we don't necessarily know what their error characteristics are. So I feel like I'm not viewing it from that kind of Baconian notion of a crucial experiment. I'm thinking we want to advance this science. We're going to be deploying these techniques to answer different kinds of questions. How do we do our best to ensure that when we run experiments, we're arriving at answers to the questions we're interested in. And so I don't, and so I don't know what Bickle, I mean, I don't know what he would have. I mean, Bickle was a part of the question too, right? I don't know what he would have to say. But does that allay your worry at all, or does it?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Yeah, but I was just hypothesizing what Bickle might say, like a way that or someone with that kind of inclination might take up the severity thing and then like really ramp it up and turn it around. But no, that does allay my concerns. And I mean, as usual, I definitely agree with you. That I mean, no, the pluralism is super important. The idea that there might be a crucial experiment is important. And I mean, so if I can just check my understanding by rephrasing what I think you'd said. If I'm understanding you right, part of what you're saying is that error characteristics are not strictly a property of a method, but they're the property of a method or tool applied in a particular experimental context. And so when we're talking about understanding the error characteristics of optogenetics, it's always optogenetics in this experiment that we're actually trying to articulate. And every time we start a new experiment, there's new error characteristics that we're going to need to uncover to get anything positive out of that procedure. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. I mean, I feel bad about how it makes me sound somehow. I don't know why, because I feel like it sounds like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, but that's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's really cool, and it also creates a lot of new problems to think about. So, but I definitely want to make sure we get some time for those audience questions. So I will.
Thanks so much, Jesse, for that. Yeah.
Of course. So I'll leave my questions there, and I'll let the main organizer take back over.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Also, well, if we have time, we come back for follow-up, so don't worry. But first,
there's also a question from Philip. We just maybe we can start with a question from Terry.
Well, yeah. Do you wanna?
Yeah, well, maybe just the first one.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read it out loud, or?
Oh, well, if you don't mind, why not? Your English is surely better than mine.
No. But it doesn't have a nice ring to it, really.
Maybe not.
Yeah, okay. So may I suggest that an important form of pluralism that needs to be recognized is temporal pluralism. It seems from these experiments that spatiotemporal precision only tells you something about a fairly precise spatiotemporal slice of the organism's behavior, not about its behavior as we normally individuate it over time, nor the organism as we normally individuate it over time. The cruder leading method, in contrast, tells you something about the behavior of the organism as we normally individuate it. It's like one technique that looks at a single frame of a movie and another technique that looks at the movie or at a 5 million portion or whatever. These are different research questions, but the important criticism of the first is just this. What is the relation between what we discover in terms of the very narrow spatiotemporal behavior of time slice they investigate and behavior? What will force them to take the real time and behavior, it has behavior in the life of the organism, into account, at least theoretically, if not experimentally?
Wow. So that's a great question, and I don't really feel as though, I mean, so maybe nothing will ever force them to take the real time and the behavior of an organism into account, because the way that we currently have to run experiments is such that we have to do things with these sort of time slices. So I think this is really, I mean, I think this adds, I mean, this is a dimension of, what's involved in this difference between acute manipulations versus permanent manipulations, as Carrie's saying here. And and I think we're always going to have a problem. I guess my feeling is this is a question about external validity. I mean, what can we possibly, when we run these experiments, actually be able to extrapolate from them to a whole intact individual organism who is living in an environment across its context? And that will, I guess, require a revolution in methodology, but also a revolution, I think. Certainly the kind of pluralism that I'm advocating, at least from my perspective. But these are really great questions, and I don't know what would force anybody to do anything really. I guess I can't ask Carrie if that's a satisfactory. But does somebody want to follow up on that, or?
Well, I mean,
maybe she's gonna see the video and your response.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We can have a mail after this, so that will be great news. We have another question from our old acquaintance, Philip Hawais, who also was a speaker. Webinar.
Hi, Philip.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Jackie. Can you hear me?
Hello. I can hear you. I can't see you. Should I see
Yeah,
you?
I think that's normal. I think you will just hear me.
Okay.
So thanks for the great talk. This was really inspiring. And I have two questions. One is about your notion of perspective and whether you can spell that out a bit more, especially in relationship to conceptual pluralism, because I was a bit puzzled by this sort of idea that one tool corresponds, or like each tool has its own perspective, or something like that you said in the Q&A, because like sort of from the case studies that I've looked at, I could easily come up with, cases where you have the same tool, let's say, for instance, single unit electrophysiological recording, and then multiple conceptual perspectives, depending on what kind of circuit concept you use to describe a cortical part, or a part of a cortical area. And then contrary, you also can have multiple tools and adopt the same perspectives. So for instance, if you use, let's say, electrophysiological recording, but then also optical imaging to reveal, let's say, a cortical column. And so that was my question, why there should be this one-to-one correspondence between tools and perspectives, and what you would think about these other cases. And then the second question was sort of back to the beginning, where you raised this issue of, well, is the brain the kind of system in which you can have clean interventions? And first I thought you meant something like, this whole discussion about fat-handedness and surgical intervention, but really what you mean, I guess, is sort of the consequences of sort of downstream effects. And so perhaps one way to analyze this further is, I think in a paper on functional imaging, Colin Klein introduces this idea of a causally dense system, so that the brain is a causally dense system because every neuron is at least weakly causally connected to every other neuron, so that you can, strictly speaking, never have these sort of these clean interventions, not meant as like sort of surgical interventions, but like meant as I can sort of like, selectively just target one cell or one circuit. So that's perhaps more of a commentary, I don't know. But like, I found that interesting. I would like to hear more whether you thought in terms of this sort of causal density, or whether you thought it in a different way.
So with respect to the second question, I'm still trying to come to terms with that. I mean, I put it out there as a point for discussion. Just to kind of explain, so I suffered a concussion last year, and I became interested in the fact that oftentimes if you hit your head and you go through a period of recovery, you see you're looking for behavioral effects that you don't necessarily know what actually kind of caused them. So anyway, so that's part of the origin of that story. And so I would agree. I mean, I don't know Colin's particular paper in which he introduces that idea, but that's something that I mean, thank you for pointing that out. So that's something I need to think about more. With respect to a perspective, I agree with what you said there too. I mean, I guess I was thinking that, you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe if you use a specific tool to look at something specific, it seems to give you a specific perspective on a specific thing that you're investigating. I certainly, and I think that I do need to develop the notion that I use of perspective a bit more. I mean, in this talk, I was really meaning perspective to only apply to the theoretical and conceptual perspective rather than the tool itself. But I kind of took that on board with Sarah's question because I think that someone might be inclined to argue that tools can provide specific kinds of perspectives on the world, right? I mean, I take that to be consistent with some of the things that Ron Geary says. So I don't know. Does that? I mean, I guess I'm not really giving you a good answer to either of your questions, except that I think I need to think about these things. They're great questions, and I think I need to think about them more.
Yeah, I guess my point with the question about tools and perspectives is, in my view, it's sort of wrong to phrase it in the way to say, well, either it's just tools or just theories, because, you know, to me, it seems like you have a conceptual perspective by using a tool in a certain way to achieve a certain experimental outcome. So if I insert an electrode vertically into the brain and then try to find similar functional response properties, it is because, like, I use this tool in this way because I'm guided sort of by the column concept, and that's my perspective on the system, right? If I wouldn't be guided by that concept, I would use the tool in a different way and thereby also perhaps act with a different perspective on the system, because if I don't expect there to be any columns, like, why should I do these vertical recordings? Like, they're not the best choice, so to say, or there's nothing to force me to do it this way. I can insert it in any sort of angle, and so that's what I mean by, like, I think I find that discussion, and I agree with you that Bickel is wrong to think about tools like being completely concept free. But I think I would draw a distinction also between theory and concepts, and then argue that the conceptual perspective comes from the way you're using a particular tool. And that's why you can have one tool and multiple perspectives, right? But also multiple tools in one perspective. Because it depends on the way, the instructions you give researchers, the way they should use these tools, either in combination or by themselves.
Right. No, that's a great point. No, and I think that's right.
Cool. That's what I'm trying to argue. So that's great that we're on the same page, and I'm inspired by your work on that. So it's good to see that we're on the same page.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't see you, but
yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for asking Thank you so much for watching and asking the question.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you.
Well. So there is some other voice from nowhere, some disembodied voice who is willing to make another question. Then she or he is welcome to click the raise hand button. Otherwise, we have two options. First one, if some commentator still has something on the tip of the tongue, it is a good moment to make another quick Q&A with Jackie. Otherwise, I have a question that I can leave it to as it's not really important, I can make it in. So, Jackie, Marcus, Sarah, anyone is willing to make a second question? I see that Sarah turned her camera on, so I suppose she has a curiosity or follow-up.
No, I was just doing it to say that you should ask your question
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, it's so kind of good. Now, let me play the provocative. I have a big crush on the post-Kuhnian philosophy of science. So even when it becomes so bad that it actually becomes sociology. So I admit this fetish. So one question I might ask, and I think you, Jackie, are the perfect person to answer to that question for us, is that let's agree, it's easy to agree that methodological pluralism, that is Beagle-approved pluralism, is fine almost for everybody. It's okay. But who has to be plural? Because, I mean, I can easily imagine that on the one side, Robert Malcolm, the sociologist of science, claimed the scientists have to be, they have this ethos of being skeptic, organized skepticism. You know, you're a scientist, so you should make do about everything. You don't trust anything. Anything is still very fallible for theory and so on. But on the other side, there are instances of counter norms. That is, for instance, in Kuhnian philosophy of science, some scientists are dogmatic. They have not to be skeptic about the hardcore of their paradigm. There are at least some things they should try and don't cut them down. So there is a tension in the scientific community as a whole. So my question is, would it be wrong if single labs are all but pluralists? Maybe they can have very good reasons to be stubborn in favor of a single methodology, of a single theoretical perspective, whereas some other rival labs try to fight against this perspective. And so they try to propose a rival hypothesis. And so the pluralism is nowhere to be found at the level of single scientists and of single research labs, but maybe it is better constituted as an emergent property of the scientific community as a whole. Now, do you think that this picture is more realistic and to be favored over everybody, let's be pluralistic picture? And if so, do you have any clue on how to regulate this hopefully profitable disagreement?
So while you're talking there, I was thinking about this talk that I gave a couple of years ago about, I mean, what I refer to as coordinated pluralism.
Yeah.
And part of what is behind that is the idea that, I mean, it's similar to the kind of claims that I'm making in this paper, where I say that, you know, we have to join efforts. I mean, scientists have to join efforts in some way to collaborate in ways that ensure cumulative knowledge production. But I received a lot of pushback from neuroscientists who said, look, you know, I don't want to be able to do what I want to do. You know, I don't want some kind of tyrannical dictator telling me that this is how, you know, I need to collaborate with these people. And so they basically, they were, you know, I mean, everything but throwing tomatoes at me. And I kind of said, well, could it be the case that maybe some of your research is kind of non-collaborative, non-pluralistic, maybe single-minded, but then you divide some of your time to try to do more kind of to maybe embrace other perspectives, to do a kind of research that's more coordinated. And I think some scientists are doing that when you look at the ones that are involved in big initiatives like, well, not the RDoC project in particular, but a project that I've looked at before called the Centrix Initiative, where you have scientists who are involved in trying to identify the neural mechanisms that are involved in certain kinds of cognitive dysfunction and schizophrenia, but then they have their own research labs and they run their own experiments in addition to doing collaborative work. And so I don't know if that answers your question necessarily, but I sort of, I mean, does it answer your question or no?
Well, you're endorsing this kind of cooperation. So it is a partial but really exhaustive. It's a good answer. Of course, you cannot answer my question because it's a unusual answer.
Yeah.
This partially answer is very satisfying on the left. Thanks. I know your paper.
No, thanks so much for the question. I mean, they're just, yeah. This has been a great session. Like I'm so glad the semester's over, and because I haven't had time to talk to anybody and like think about this stuff. So I'm really glad. This is, and you've all been great. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not ending the session, but I'm just saying that.
Oh, yes, the clock says that we are
Yeah, we're running out of time.
So let me clap once more to Jagged and to everybody. That was a really great session.